There is a sense that Hitchcock did everything, and that's just not true. He did sketch himself. He started off as a storyboard for title designs in the early 1920s on films. But the common theme, and again, sure, he was a collaborator, but he gave people their freedom to do their work, and he trusted their work.
So I haven't had the chance to finish the book yet, but from what I've read so far, I've really loved it. I'm a big Hitchcock fan, so I love learning, more about him any way I can. You're obviously a big Hitchcock fan as well. I mean, you've already got three other books under your belt with for him. How did this one come about for you?
Well, I'd always wanted to do something about the visual art of Alfred Hitchcock because he's very much about camera logic, very much thinks about what's in the box, the rectangle. He always used to say, I've got a rectangle I need to fill. So he's very inspirational for so many directors. Through his storyboarding, he always said, I wanted to put everything down on paper before a film starts, whether it's a script or the mise en scène. And storyboarding is such a huge part of that. And his cinematic legacy, if you think about the shower sequence in Psycho, the crows gathering on the jungle gym in The Birds, or the crop duster attack in North by Northwest, they were all carefully storyboarded and just ingrained in part of our cinematic logic.
With that said, then, I mean, did you have a film that you were really excited to get to explore its storyboards, both in general as well as for this book?
There are 9-10 chapters in the book, and we go through the early periods from the 39 Steps through to Torn Curtain, which is his 50th feature. And I knew that I had to do the classic Hitchcock films like North by Northwest, Psycho, and The Birds for reasons that we talked about. But what surprised me was the level of detail in the earliest films, the 39 Steps, Spellbound, Shadow of a Doubt. It was really fascinating for me to go back to that early period, not only in Britain, but also in America. Spellbound, obviously, because of Salvador Dali, who was a huge influence on the dream sequence. He was hired by Hitchcock to design the dream sequence in Spellbound. And that was a film I hadn't really studied. And similarly with Shadow of a Doubt, it was his first truly American film. He was brought over for Rebecca, but he always said that with Shadow of a Doubt, he got to grips with small town America and the American family and the American house. So it's really interesting to look at the storyboards for that. And personally, I love his early British period as well with the 39 Steps. It's one of my favorite films. And that was all carefully storyboarded with a German emigre production designer named Oscar Verndorf. So it's really fascinating to look into that.
With so many of these being, almost 100 years old and being done in pencil, I mean, there can be a concern of whether you can even find proper preserved copies of a lot of these storyboards. Did you have any of those fears when going into the creation of this book?
Luckily, the 39 Steps is preserved at the British Film Institute in London, where I'm based. And so that was my first port of call. And the storyboards are all carefully catalogued. But what was amazing for me, I discovered some storyboards which had never been published before, to my knowledge. Because if you go on the internet and you type in 39 Steps storyboard, there are like eight key sequences which come up time and again. But because of a particular cataloguing, I found about half a dozen which had not been released into the public domain, and they're in the book. And I said to the editor when I found them, we've just got to include them. And again, they're Oscar Verndorf designs with Hitchcock on some key sequences of the 39 Steps. So that was really exciting for me.
Which film were you surprised then maybe that didn't have as many storyboards to access for this book?
I have to think about that because I didn't choose, Hitchcock directed 52 films and I chose the ones where I knew there were storyboards and they were boards which people hadn't really explored and seen rather than were tried and tested. So I have to come back to you on that one, to be honest.
Fair enough. I can only imagine having to narrow down that list.
Yeah.
Now, this book also features both conversations with people who knew Hitchcock as well as past quotes from prior publications. how did you go about determining who you wanted to talk to, and who you could talk to for this book?
That was really important to me, to cover the storyboard artists, the production designers, the illustrators. And so it wasn't just about Hitchcock, it was really about the men and women he collaborated with. I've mentioned Oscar Werndorf, a German emigre, to begin with. He did a few of Hitchcock films in the mid 1930s, like The 39 Steps and Sabotage. But what was really exciting for me was to write about Dorothea Holt, because she was one of the first female storyboard artists, and she designed the sets and drew the sketches for Rebecca and Shadow of a Doubt. And Hitchcock hired her through David O. Selznick, because obviously David O. Selznick was a producer of Rebecca. And Dorothea Holt was working for Selznick on Gone with the Wind. She said, I've drawn that damn Tara staircase about 64 times. And so she was really fascinating, and her children really helped me. Obviously, Dorothea lived to a great old age, into her 90s, but she passed away some 10 years ago. But her children were really helpful for me talking. And so I did that a lot, because unfortunately, most of the production designers, like Robert Boyle, who did The Birds, North by Northwest, and Marnie, he passed away. But I had the great fortune to interview him whilst he was still alive, when I wrote my Marnie book about 24 years ago now. And so I include some of the transcripts. I taped all my interviews from his conversations on The Birds of North by Northwest, and that's in the book. Similarly, with Harold Michelson, he was a storyboard artist for The Birds and Marnie. I interviewed him at length for both of my books on The Birds and Marnie, and so he's in there. Bob Bumstead, Henry Bumstead's son, helped me with the Vertigo chapter. Henry Bumstead's a very important person in Hitchcock's films, because he was a production designer on 5 of them, from The Man Who Knew Too Much to Family Plot. So he was very instrumental to cover. But the biggest surprise and discovery for me, of great excitement, was that the storyboard artist for Torn Curtain is still alive. His name is Joseph Musse. And I contacted him through the Guild, and he gave me some terrific stories about Torn Curtain. I originally wasn't going to include Torn Curtain in the book. I was going to end on Marnie, but I had to include Joseph's, because it was so valuable to have a storyboard artist still with us. And he started with Hitchcock when he was 23 in the mid 1960s, on Torn Curtain. And then the Family Plot storyboard artist, Joseph Wright, is still with us, Thomas Wright, he's still with us, which is very exciting, because he helped me with both Topaz and Family Plot, because he started as a production illustrator with Hitchcock.
I love that you got to have those relationships with those people then. Who, and not that it's easy to narrow down, but who would you say gave you the most surprising information from the people who are still alive that had worked with Hitchcock?
There's a real pattern with working with Hitchcock. A lot of people said he was a perfectionist, knew what he wanted, ideas on paper. But there is a sense that Hitchcock did everything, and that's just not true. He did sketch himself. He started off as a storyboard for title designs in the early 1920s on films. But the common theme, and again, sure, he was a collaborator, but he gave people their freedom to do their work, and he trusted their work, and he hired professionals. So that came across repeatedly. There are a few myths that I uncover about the book, one of which is there's a big myth about North by Northwest that Mentor Hubner, who's the storyboard artist for The Crop Duster, didn't actually draw the storyboard artist for the Crop Duster attack. There was a myth going around that it was done after the event, but I got to the bottom of that in the book. I don't really want to spoil the story, because it's quite a story, but anyone who reads that chapter will uncover the truth, I think.
I haven't gotten there yet myself, admittedly, so I'm excited to get to dive into it. So now that you've had a few books about Hitchcock, you've also been outspoken about the one HBO BBC film about him. What is it about Hitchcock as a person, as a director, that really has continued to resonate with you all these years?
I think he's a great teacher who inspired many others, many other filmmakers, and a lot of his collaborators have told me that. And when you look at films today, I cover it in my movie making masterclass book, which I just republished last year. I brought it up to date. When you look at contemporary directors today, they're really inspired by him, and they continue to be inspired by him, whether it's Matt Reeves in the Batman film, or Park Chan-wook, or Bong Joon-ho. There are so many international directors who are really inspired by Hitchcock, and they continually use his work. Martin Scorsese is a big Hitchcock fan through the use of montage. David Fincher's a big Hitchcock fan, Christopher Nolan, and these are all great directors who are like resonating with us today. And a lot of their study and work and inspiration comes from Hitchcock's films.
It's crazy to think the legacy that continues with him all these years later. Do you have a particular favorite movie of his, by the way?
I always lean towards North by Northwest as a movie that I would introduce to any audience, because it's very accessible and it started the whole James Bond entertainment thriller. But it's so polished. Cary Grant and Eva Mary Saint and James Mason, what a fantastic trio. And it's got so many Hitchcock motifs, and it's gorgeous, and it's every kind of piece is a frame, and you're moving in that northwesterly direction. It's just great witty screenplay by Ernest Lehman, original screenplay as well. So I would probably gravitate to North by Northwest. Of course, I love Vertigo and Marnie and some of the more psychological ones, but North by Northwest will stand up. You can watch it on a loop for a general audience, and they'll be pleased. It's a crowd pleaser.
It remains a classic for a good reason. Yeah. So if you were to put together another Hitchcock book, do you think you would do one that's career encompassing, kind of like the Storyboard, or would you go back to a one film focused book, kind of like you did with Marnie?
I'm actually writing another Hitchcock book on his reputation at the moment, and a biography Reputation. I haven't done a solid biography, and so that's in the works. It's actually been in the works for the last 12 years. And now it's going to be published in the next couple of years. I'm reaching out to various publishers, because there are so many misconceptions out there in the media, it's like Chinese whispers, which has just grown and grown and grown. And I've got so much information from the taped interviews and unpublished material, which I haven't divulged. But this book, I will put the record straight. So I'm very excited about that.
That's incredible. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. Yeah. So with this book, then, the Storyboard book, what do you really hope that readers can take away from it? Whether it be a general understanding of how storyboarding works, or whether it be Hitchcock's influence on storyboarding in general, what do you hope readers take away from it?
Well, it's a beautifully designed book. It's very glossy. The visuals from the Margaret Herrick Library, and also the British Film Institute, as I mentioned, but also the Salvador Dali images. The foundation allowed us to reprint some of the original Dalis. So it's a great Christmas present book. It's a coffee table book. It would look great just absorb the images, whether it's the Vertigo images or Spellbound or the first 39 steps. And as Hitchcock said, thinking about what's inside the frame, and every frame is like a slice of cake. It's just so gorgeous to look at. So that's probably the main one. Enjoyment, visual enjoyment, because I love art. I like looking at paintings, and each storyboard, if you look at every frame of Vertigo, I think it's a painting itself, every single frame. And there are so many frames that you can enjoy, and your senses can, really imagine and run wild with that.
Well, I really look forward to when people get their hands on this book, as well as when I can get a physical copy. I've been reading the PDF, so I'm excited for for a physical copy. But that's all the questions I really had, Tony. So thank you so much for taking the time. I greatly appreciate it.